yours truly, Brevin Thompson, is back. Since we're continuing on with our Spider-Man reviews, we already wrapped up on the Sam Raimi trilogy. Now we reached the Mark Webb films, and we're starting off with The Amazing Spider-Man, which was released in 2012, and was the first to star Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. Now, I remember first seeing this back in 2012 with a little bit of disappointment, honestly, because I didn't know at first what to expect with a new interpretation of the character, because I wasn't really ready for a reboot of Spider-Man, especially after Spider-Man 3, and given what direction Sony was going with, having another retelling of Spider-Man's origin story, especially after 5 years after Spider-Man 3 was released, I was mostly wanting a fourth film with Tobey Maguire, and sadly, of course, that never happened because Sam Raimi went through many drafts and revisions for a script for Spider-Man 4 and was never happy with any of them, so Sony decided to flip the reboot switch, and that's when we got The Amazing Spider-Man. I don't hate this film the way a lot of people on the internet do, because I see that this film does have some amount of potential, because, and this is coming from somebody who has not watched this film in years, and it took me, so I watched this, and trying to think, I tried to pretend like this is, the first time I'm seeing it. And I personally think that I don't think it's perfect at all by any means. It's nowhere near as good as the first two Sam Raimi films. But it is good enough to be at least a decent Spider-Man film. And that's the best I can say for this, for Andrew Garfield's first go as the web slinger. What would you say, Cameron?
Well, I would certainly agree with some of the points that you point out, Brevin. I understand that when people look at this Spider-Man, the vast majority of the time all they see for the most part is disappointment, especially when it first came out. They didn't know what to think of it after what happened with Tobey Maguire. When I found out it was a reboot, I had mixed feelings. However, like you, when I first saw this, I didn't hate it. In fact, I saw Andrew Garfield to have a lot of potential when he first started. He was very much alike with Tobey Maguire. They were very similar in a lot of ways.
But also completely different in some areas.
Of course. And that, to me, is the whole point of the matter.
But mostly, I think what, in terms of what they were managing to achieve in terms of storytelling, of course, this is a new origin story, but they don't try to, they're trying their best not to, repeat everything that Sam Raimi already did with the first film back in 2002.
I can definitely agree with that, and while I do see a lot of similarities, to be honest, I see it more as a homage to what Sam Raimi had created. They were really inspired by his work. What it's worth, I personally was just very excited when I first saw it. I thought it was really good. It's not as good as the Sam Raimi trilogy, of course.
Yeah.
But for a saga that stands on its own, I really think that it does a good job, especially with Andrew Garfield's portrayal as Spider-Man. I think he's pretty much a better Spider-Man in terms of both humor and
Well, yeah, especially that one scene where he's just webbing the cart thief, especially in the nuts.
Yeah,
we'll get to that. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny stuff that this film really emphasizes, and it's like that they knew that perhaps that Tobey Maguire
lacked a lot of humor.
To some degree, and maybe some traditional situations that Spider-Man is particularly in. And they pretty much took that half and put it with Andrew Garfield, and he kind of nails that part of the character, I think, a bit more than he did.
Yeah, I do agree with you on that. So much like our reviews for the Sam Raimi trilogy, this review also will contain spoilers. So if you have not watched the film, and if you're watching this video right now, that is your warning. But mostly for this film, I mostly like that they chose to show Peter's parents right before he moves in with Aunt May and Uncle Ben.
Yeah, I personally very much enjoyed that part of the movie myself because, even Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, while awesome in a lot of ways, I think that's one aspect we never really got to see or explore much, and
Yeah,
really
they tried to explore a bit of it in some degree in this film, but they tried to explore it a bit more later in the sequel.
Yeah, it's a rather creative way of introducing them as well as exploring them later.
Yeah, so his parents are forced to have Peter move in with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and the reasons why, they're furthermore explained in the sequel. But first, we see Peter and attempting to play hide and seek with his parents, his father is secretly just doing his work. But then we see that his office has been broken into and trashed, and that's when his father Richard realizes that they need to leave. So, so then we see him. We see his parents take him to live with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and then we cut to him, Peter, now as a teenager in high school, and when it comes to Andrew Garfield, for the most part, as Peter Parker, I think that for the most part, he has the intelligence that we come to expect from Peter Parker, and that's what I always can like to see from intelligent Peter Parker. But he kind of lacks the nerdy side of Peter Parker. Even though he has the intelligence of the character, he just looks too good looking to be a believable Peter Parker, because he looks like an average cool guy that you would normally see in high school. And honestly, I thought Andrew Garfield looked a little bit too old to look like he's a typical high school student. But one thing that he nails is what he does as Spider-Man, though, which is what you mostly point out when it comes to his portrayal of Spider-Man. But he kind of lacks what you would normally expect from a nerdy, believable Peter Parker.
I'd say, in terms of Spider-Man, totally agree. In terms of his portrayal as Peter Parker, I would say 50-50, fair to say. Because, as you said, he has the intelligence, but he does not necessarily look like a believable Peter Parker in some regards. That's kind of why I always keep saying that in terms of Spider-Man throughout the years, Tobey Maguire made a better Peter Parker, but Andrew Garfield made a better Spider-Man. So it's like each of them had one half of what the other needed, and they really just kind of balance it out with Tom Holland for reasons that I think we'll get into later.
Yeah. And when it came to Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy, I honestly do think that she is really good as Gwen Stacy, and I do think that for the most part she and Andrew Garfield do have good chemistry. Mostly around that time they were a couple in real life.
Yeah, I read about that a while back when the movie first came out.
Especially around the time when they were doing an Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, that was really interesting to know that they were a couple in real life. And as far as comic book accuracy for the character in just about every way, I cannot think of a more accurate Gwen Stacy than Emma Stone. Although, the one from Spider-Man 3, her name was...
Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yes, Bryce Dallas Howard. She did a nice job, but I think she probably wouldn't have been in there in the first place if Venom wasn't around, so I kind of say she's good that she's there, but we probably could either counter or discount her depending on how you look at it.
And also when it comes to Sally Fields and Martin Sheen as Aunt May and Uncle Ben, I'd say for the most part they are pretty good. But, though they're not as, excellent as Rosemary Harris or Cliff Robertson as they were in the Sam Raimi films.
Yeah.
Because when it came to, Uncle Ben's, when he's talking to Peter in this film, like his version of the with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, he's like, if you can do, I mean, because your father believed if you can do good things for other people, you have a moral obligation to do those things. That's what's missing here. Not choice, responsibility. Which I can understand them wanting to try to, like, put their own spin on that famous line, but I mean, they just didn't like go in like all the way. But I can understand. Like I said, they were trying their best not to repeat what Sam Raimi already did.
Yeah, and for the most part, I still believe that Sam Raimi's Uncle Ben and Aunt May were like the best portrayals of them, except for maybe the one that plays Aunt May in Tom Holland's world, but we'll get into that later. But when it comes to these versions of Aunt May and Uncle Ben, I really enjoy them because one, they're pretty famous people, real good choice for the matter, and when it comes to their own take, they pretty much give us, like Brevin said, a more in-depth version of, like, the meaning of with great power comes great responsibility, and I really enjoy the time that I see them on the big screen.
I do think that they were really good as those characters, honestly.
They find his dad's briefcase in the basement that he left with them the night that his parents left. And Uncle Ben's like, I completely forgot about that thing. It was your dad's. And Peter finds a lot of his old equipment, his calculators, some tokens, his father's glasses in there. And basically, he wonders why his dad could have left that with them because there was nothing in it. But he finds this folder in a secret compartment in the case that apparently had some of his dad's old equations called the decay rate algorithm.
Yeah, because him and his partner, Dr. Connors, mostly Dr. Connors is mostly working on cross-species genetics because he's mostly wanting to experiment with lizard DNA because he wants to regrow his arm, and he also wants to create a perfect world with perfect human beings who won't be able to like suffer from disease or anything like that, which I can't understand as a pretty good motivation.
Yeah, I personally cannot think of something better than the desire to want to try to help people cure illnesses, make the world a better place, simple equality.
But especially mostly when Dr. Connors turns into the lizard. I mean, he has like good intentions, but he doesn't understand what he's doing later in the film is evil. When Peter is in Oscorp, I mean, he comes across like this thing that like is like containing all the genetically enhanced spiders. One that would eventually bite him.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting, really. We get this funny little scene with Peter in the subway, and he's basically unconscious.
But I could tell like this one guy like puts a beer on his forehead. I mean, it gets this. I mean, we get this like one comedic moment where with him like when his powers like come into effect. I mean, he's just like he's holding onto a pole. And he just accidentally ends up like knocking people out. I mean, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, he even jumped straight up to the ceiling the moment a touch of water hit his forehead from the beer can.
I mean, it was a beer bottle.
Really.
And when he gets home, I mean, well, there's one funny moment when he wakes up. I mean, he smashes his alarm clock, and he's trying to. I mean, he doesn't know the limits of his strength yet.
Yeah. Really.
So he decides to after a whole for that shouldn't he be like questioning things? It's just like, why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
It was pretty funny.
This part in this film I thought was pretty interesting. We basically get this next scene a little later on where Peter decides to go to Connor's house, and he tells him he's Richard Parker's son, who was his old partner back in the day, and they decided to talk a little bit about what happened, what they were working on, and all kinds of things. I thought that was a very heartwarming kind of scene. Really shed some light on a few things.
Yeah.
And there's like this interesting moment where Connors accidentally drops a coffee cup and Peter catches it because of spider reflex, and it's just awesome.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's not like near. I mean, it was interesting, but not as near as iconic as that one cafeteria scene in the first Spider-Man film.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. And to be honest, part of me doesn't think that any of this will be as iconic, but I think the point is they were trying to like honor that. Give us a little bit of a similarity, but not quite in something of that detail.
Yeah, I can get that.
At the same time, though. They're talking about pretty much the idea that Connors has regarding cross-species genetics. Like, what would happen, so to speak, if the foreign substance that they inject into someone would take over? And he says the problem was always the decay rate algorithm, so Peter gives him his father's equation, and they try to work together to basically complete the research. And it's just really awesome what they decide to do.
Yeah, I always one scene that I like right after that was the scene with Peter getting back at Flash, and using his strength to break a basketball backboard. That was just so funny. So when it comes to the music video skateboard montage. With Peter testing his abilities. I mean, like in this one warehouse with him just riding on a skateboard and swinging through chains and everything. That scene alone I just thought was okay at best, but I mean,
I think it's pretty fun. It's just a moment in the movie where you find you have powers, good reflexes, and you find a way to use them. Just let loose, have some fun, do a few tricks.
Oh yeah, Peter and Dr. Connors test the algorithm's equation.
To help a mouse, Freddy and Wilmer basically test subjects, 3-legged mice, to regenerate their lost limbs using lizard DNA and the algorithm as a catalyst.
Yeah, and then after that, that's when we have that argument with Peter and Uncle Ben, and of course Peter leaves, and that's when they rehash the murder of Uncle Ben. Mm-hmm. But unlike the original Sam Raimi film, where he actually caught supposedly who was supposed to be Uncle Ben's killer in the first film. I mean, in the original film, anyway. We get this montage of Peter going through the streets of New York, just taking out various criminals, just trying to find who killed Uncle Ben. And when it comes to how he comes up with a mask as well as costume designs. I mean, he wears just a regular red mask as well as some sunglasses to keep his identity secret.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, he creates the web shooters, and when it comes to his overall Spider-Man costume, it takes him about almost an hour before he we actually see him in his actual Spider-Man costume.
Mm.
I have always had mixed feelings on this costume. For the one thing, it just doesn't really feel like a Spider-Man costume, and it's more like a prototype type of costume. I mean, that's what I always like to try to prefer it as, but it just doesn't really suit the character of Spider-Man, really. I mean, sure, you get the traditional red and blue and of course the eye lens, but it just doesn't really feel like Spider-Man to me. It's just the one suit that I've always had been mixed on for years.
Yeah, and I totally understand what you mean. A lot of times when I first saw that suit in theaters, I honestly didn't know what to think, but the design itself kind of eventually grew on me. However, I still kind of didn't know what to make of it in some cases. But that's why I was really glad in the second movie when they decided to listen to the fans and upgrade the suit to a more traditional.
That's like one of the few things that the sequel like improved on. So that's like the best amount of praise that I will get this that I will give the sequel. We'll get more onto that later.